Alright, so welcome everyone in the Bastion. The walls are standing high and the citadel is protected from the banksters. My name is Guillaume Girard. I'm the head of digital assets for KRYPTOSPHERE. And with me today, I have my co-host, Fanis Mikalakis. Fanis, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thank you, Guillaume.
Alright, so first, let me talk to you about what we are trying to do, what we are trying to achieve with the Bastion. So Fanis and myself are both what would say passionate about Bitcoin, and we've decided that we wanted to give back as much as Bitcoin has given us. So we are hoping to achieve, we are hoping to make a talk show where people who are curious about Bitcoin and maximalism can come and listen to experts and professionals to understand the philosophy of Bitcoin, the way it is going to disrupt traditional financial markets, or to get to know Bitcoin companies trying to make our experience more enjoyable on the network and when we use it. And so I hope you will forgive us for our rusty French accents, but it's only going to get better with time. So in just a minute, I will introduce today's very special speaker. But first, this show is brought to you by KRYPTOSPHERE. So what is KRYPTOSPHERE? KRYPTOSPHERE is the first student association in France. Fanis and myself are part of it. And so we are present in different business schools and engineering schools across France. And we are essentially trying to democratize and vulgarize blockchain and cryptocurrencies to the public and also to companies. So we regularly host events and we also do formations for people. And overall, we have a lot of students that are passionate about Bitcoin. And so don't forget to follow us on social media at KRYPTOSPHERE. Also, I'd like to thank Le Journal du Coin for sharing this event. If you speak French and you want to stay up to date with the latest news on crypto, do not hesitate to follow them on Twitter at Le Journal du Coin. Donc je disais, si vous parlez français, bien évidemment, vous pouvez suivre notre partenaire Le Journal du Coin pour ne rien rater de l'actu crypto. Alright, so today, for the first episode of our Bastion series, I would like everyone to give a warm welcome to Pierre Rochard. Pierre, how are you doing?
Doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. So what's the situation in the land of the free about the coronavirus and all?
Yeah, I should probably start by explaining why I'm speaking in English instead of in French, despite my name.
We are going
Pierre
to get
Rochard.
to that.
Okay. And the coronavirus situation is, I guess, stable here in the U.S. Most people are still in lockdown, and it seems like the hospitals are fine here, and in Texas at least, where I am at. But I know that in New York City they're overwhelmed. So yeah, it hasn't really impacted my life much because I just do stuff on the computer and show up on VR panels. So hopefully things go back to normal soon.
Yeah, I hope too it will get back to normal. So let me ask you a question first. What do you think of the VR environment? So I think it's an easy way to bring the community together and actually reach people around the globe to talk about Bitcoin. Like, what do you think about virtual reality?
So this is like one of my first times in virtual reality. And so far, I'm very impressed. It's got a bit of a learning curve to it of figuring out the software and also the adjusting the headset so that you've got a. Okay, I'm back on. Okay, so yeah, I like it a lot. I think that even without coronavirus, that this would actually be a really awesome medium to meet people in and to interact with different people. So I do think that one of the problems is the high upfront cost of getting a headset that is, of high quality, that doesn't make you nauseous or whatever. That people are finding it easy to justify that cost if they don't have to pay for a flight and a hotel and all that comes along with the burden of flying somewhere and traveling. So now that said, I also think that long run, it's going to take more from other online platforms, right? Other digital platforms. It's not going to take away from real world interaction because this is just not the same as meeting someone in real life. It's better than meeting someone on Twitter though. So it's still worse though than being in the same room with everyone here. Although I'm sure some of you are pretty unpleasant in real life, so that maybe it's nice to not meet you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
You've got the greatest audience here.
Yeah, but
So,
it's
by
also
the way,
definitely easier to have you here in this room rather than have you come to France, for instance. So it's also, yeah.
Should work now. So the other
Yeah.
thing that this issue of like getting muted made me think of is that in virtual reality, you're able to control private property much more effectively because you can mute someone and you can kick them out, and there's no risk of violence, right? So it's very easy to moderate your personal environment in virtual reality, just as it is on Twitter, right? Blocking someone or muting them is you can do it without violating their property rights or having to get physical.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that when we talk about maximalism, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so as Ziad said, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you've always wanted to ask Pierre a question, now is your time. And don't worry, if you speak French, vous parlez français, n'hésitez pas, on traduira votre question directement à Pierre.
Je peux comprendre le français, même si j'ai du mal à parler le français.
Yes. Do you have a couple of words
so
for the French community? Because I know we have a couple of maximalists watching right now in France.
Okay, sorry. I need to not walk around because apparently if you walk around, you automatically become an audience member and then you lose the audio. So I think that there's kind of a problem in France is that there's very few libertarians in France compared to in the United States. And so that I think has an effect where there's going to be fewer Bitcoiners. And that said, over the years I have been on this web forum, libéraux.org, and it's got some excellent conversations in French about libertarianism, or what Americans call libertarianism, that the French call, far right. Oh no! What is their phrase for ultra-libéraux? Right? The most anarcho-capitalist variety. But although I am in that camp, and I have described my economic views as ultra-libéral in France. Here in the U.S., it's just much more widespread, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so before we start with the talk show, I'd like to begin by reading something to everyone, because I think it's important that we remind ourselves that Bitcoin goes beyond just a store of value or hedge against inflation, but rather a fundamental innovation to defend our rights and freedom. And Pierre, I'll let you comment on that. It was written on Medium by Citizen Bitcoin. I think you know him.
Yeah.
And he tried to write what he called a declaration of monetary independence. And so we are going to make it an habit of ours to read the first paragraph to our audience for everyone to see and hear what you think about it. So, in anonymous declaration of the decentralized nodes of Bitcoin, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for people to dissolve the monetary bands which have connected them with another and to assume the separate and equal station to which the laws of natural money and of human nature entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to separation. We adults this truth to be self-evident, that all humans deserve certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and property, that to secure these rights, Bitcoin is instituted among humans, deriving powers from the consent of the node operators, that whenever any form of monetary policy becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the node operators to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new monarchy, laying its foundation on such principle and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem not most likely to affect their safety and property. So Pierre, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that it is always important to emphasize that ultimately the way that users are able to interact with the system is through a node. And this is very different from existing monetary systems, whether it is the government that we're talking about or gold miners and the gold standard in the past, so the ability to automate the entire consensus around this monetary system and put it into this package of a node, that is to me what differentiates Bitcoin from the rest, and what all the altcoins can't differentiate from. Because there isn't really any other way to go about doing this in terms of having socially scalable governance where you're minimizing the disagreement surface, right? And so what the peer-to-peer node governance allows for is a level of immutability that really makes it so that we can have protocol rules that aren't changing under our feet and have some persistence to them, because in the technology world, everyone wants to do something in 6 months, but Bitcoin is much longer term than that from an economic perspective, and so from a governance perspective, it is also much longer term. And what the peer-to-peer governance allows for, because sometimes people just have complete differences as to what the direction the protocol should go in, they can actually split off into their own separate consensus, right? And so that's what happened with Bitcoin Cash, where the Bitcoin Cash proponents were simply not happy with the rules of the Bitcoin system, namely one rule of the many about the block size limit. And they were able to change that rule and create a new consensus without imposing their will on the rest of the Bitcoin system. And so allowing for people to exit when their voice has been heard and not it's been heard, but it hasn't been listened to or acted upon. And you don't have that in political systems like the Federal Reserve. Like, if you disagree with QE, it's not like you're able to stay on USD and the Federal Reserve has to go, change their name of the monetary unit to Federal Reserve notes, which is what they should have done. But no, they kept US dollar. And so they're able to impose, and that was from them changing the rules, right? And so whenever you have a system where someone can just change the rules and print more money, they're definitely going to do that. No one would resist the temptation of printing money. And so Bitcoin allows us to have a system where we have certainty about the amount of money that's getting printed and who it's going to. And that's really the core part of like the proof of work, consumption of energy, and then the node's ability to verify that monetary policy. There's just no other asset like it.
Yeah, most definitely. So what I'm proposing is that we start with the first part of our talk show. So the first part is going to be an interview with Pierre, what we call the hors d'oeuvre of today. And so
Delicious.
in the second part, we will talk about the actual subject of today, that is Bitcoin as the world reserve currency, and we'll also have a debate on Bitcoin maximalism. And we will finish with a third part with a fun session of Q&A with Pierre and rapid fire questions. So for the hors d'oeuvre, first of all, Pierre, can we talk about your French origins? Like, where did you grow up? Why do you speak French,
sure.
etc.?
Yeah, so most of my family is from Brittany, so that part of coastal France on the Atlantic, you know, I was born in Paris. Both my parents are French, and when I was 4 years old, we moved to Scotland. So I did learn French at a young age, and both my parents spoke French at home. But then, as I grew older, you know, I spent 3 years in Grenoble, so I was able to relearn French when I was in high school, essentially, and passed. No, actually, I passed French. You know, what do they call it? Yeah, French class. The last one in première, so my French was pretty good coming out of high school, but then I spent the past like decade in the U.S. and married an American lady, so I don't get to practice my French very much. And it would be great to be able to speak about Bitcoin in French, but I don't even really know the vocabulary because I found out about Bitcoin after I came back from France and never really discussed it with anyone in French. I've only ever discussed it in English. So, you know, hopefully if I start listening to your content, I'm going to be able to relearn everything.
Yeah, maybe. And talking about Bitcoin, when did you first heard about Bitcoin, and what did you think about it without the knowledge that you have now about about it?
Yeah. So I first learned about it on Slashdot. There was an article about it, and I think that it was in the context of the Silk Road, and that might have been like 2011 or early 2012. I downloaded. So I thought to myself, oh, I should do this mining thing, and so I downloaded the Bitcoin QT, you know, wallet, node, and miner software onto my computer, and opened it up and did not see a button that I could push to mine, and so I was like, okay, well, I can't figure this out, so I just closed it. And if I had figured it out, you know, you just got to go in the console, you got to type in that you want to mine. That would have been great, but I didn't make the connection at the time that this was not only like internet money that people are using for illegal ends, but it's also a monetary system with a fixed supply, and that's not something that I even thought to ask about, like when I first learned about Bitcoin. I just decided to move on, because at that point I was already a silver bug and a gold bug. So I was into the sound money, the precious metals, and the 100% reserve banking. But you know, I didn't think of Bitcoin as sound money the first time I heard about it. The second time I heard about it was in a completely different context. I was part of a reading circle called the Mises Circle, and we would talk about Austrian economics. And a very popular and fun topic to discuss in Austrian economics is fractional reserve banking, 100% reserve banking, central banks, and money and gold and fiat. Like, that's something that Austro-libertarian scholars have discussed ad infinitum. And I found those topics to be the most interesting topics in Austrian economics. And I read about it from all sorts of different angles too. Like, I'd actually read a mainstream monetary economics textbook, so learned about all the Keynesian and neo-Keynesian and John Nash and all these different schools of thought outside of Austrian economics. But ultimately, I found that the Austrians are the only ones who have a comprehensive enough view of monetary economics to actually have the right intuitions about what makes for a good money. And that is something that really differentiates the Austrian view on Bitcoin from the Keynesian or the neoclassical view on Bitcoin. And the Austrians are the only school of thought that have really embraced Bitcoin on this level of understanding it as sound money. Keynesians hate sound money.
Yeah, so I mean, that was actually my next question, because for Bitcoiners, there's often an idea that comes back, and it is falling down the rabbit hole. When you learn about Bitcoin, you're also going to learn about philosophy, economics, and all range of topics. And so for you, when do you think you fell down the rabbit hole, and are you still learning to this day the new concepts and new ideas?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that, when I was learning about this Austrian economic stuff, Daniel Kraywitz and Michael Goldstein were already familiar with Bitcoin, and it came up in that conversation. And I read that there would be a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin, and that's when I realized, okay, this is the soundest money conceivable, because the ideal would just be a fixed supply of money that is going to be circulated at whatever velocity. So from an Austrian perspective, like, having a absolutely stable monetary policy, which is even better than gold's monetary policy, like, that's something that to me was mind-boggling, and seemed that it would make Bitcoin adoption inevitable, because this is the ideal money to be holding.
Yeah, and so you understand the value proposition of Bitcoin, you understand the concept around it, you start to dig on the internet about what is Bitcoin and what it's going to bring to the world. But when do you actually decide to make a living out of it? Because from what I've read, now you work for Kraken as a Bitcoin strategist, but you've also created the Nakamoto Institute, which a lot of people know you from. And you've also a company that you call Bitcoin Advisory, where you actually advise people to become sovereign about their money, essentially. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So Bitcoin Advisory really doesn't exist anymore because I work full-time at Kraken. But it is actually very similar to what I do at Kraken in terms of figuring out both from the Bitcoin perspective of what is going to actually cause Bitcoin adoption, and then from the business perspective of how do we capitalize on that, and what should we prioritize based on that. That's the same kind of thinking I had at Bitcoin Advisory and that I have now at Kraken. What really, I think that when I first learned about Bitcoin, I was just an accounting student at UT Austin, and I, was just going to go work in a Big Four accounting firm, and when I started learning about Bitcoin and getting really excited about it and seeing that it was the future of money, I wanted to figure out, okay, how do I do the accounting for this? Like, and how do I do it in an automated manner so I don't have to, you know, deal with spreadsheets and copy pasting things. So that's when I started learning Python. And Python's this programming language that is fairly easy to learn for beginners. And I didn't really have a programming background at all. So just going on Codecademy and having an interactive tutorial where they teach you about for loops and all of this SQL database stuff. And that got me really excited about software development and much less excited about accounting, because now every time I was performing an accounting task, my brain was going to, like, here's how you would write a Python script to automate this. And so it's frustrating to be an accountant the moment I started learning how to code. So in any case, I basically left the accounting profession and learned how to be a software developer. I was a software developer, still am developing some software, more about that later, but in any case, I have both the kind of business background of accounting and the software background of having written a good number of lines of code. Now, granted, you know, I don't have a computer science degree, so don't take what I say for granted. In fact, even if someone does have a computer science degree, don't take what they say about Bitcoin seriously. What you have to do instead is take their view and then go on the internet and verify that their view is actually correct, okay? So whether that's from me or from an actual computer scientist, it's a big mistake
Yeah.
It's a big mistake to just trust what people are saying.
Yeah, so do your own research, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and what would you say today about the professional industry in blockchain? I mean, do you think it's mature enough, or do you think it has still room to grow?
Oh, I mean, it still has room to grow for sure, and Kraken is still growing, and I think that the exchanges are going to continue to be a major source of growth in the industry, because I don't think that there's any business whose revenue is more correlated with the value of the underlying assets than the exchanges themselves, right? That are taking a percentage of the volume, and so as revenue. So from that perspective, I think that most of the value from an industry perspective, right, not from a holding Bitcoin perspective, because there's some debate as to whether the equity of an exchange has ever outperformed the the value of Bitcoin over that period. But you know, obviously, if you are a CZ and you own Binance, like you're doing pretty well for yourself. And so I think that the industry's growth is still going to continue to be focused on exchanges. You know, there's some debate as to whether that's good or not. And there are people who say, like, oh, it's terrible that these assets, and Bitcoin is the biggest part of that. 80% of the market is Bitcoin in crypto, and these assets should not be speculated on, and that they should have some either a fixed value, or that the traders are essentially undermining the system. And I think that's completely false. And I haven't seen any negative effect from that layer onto the Bitcoin protocol and into its decentralized nature. Now, what I do think is that if Bitcoin is going to replace fiat currencies, right, that exchanges are going to have to evolve through that process, because there's going to be lots of other things going on. And being a fiat on and off ramp is, long term, I don't think that that's a viable business. But there's different debates about how long that long term is going to be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Pierre.
And do you think,
And
speaking about
in a couple of seconds,
speaking about exchanges, do you see, you know, peer-to-peer exchanges such as BISC network, you know, becoming a thing in a few years, or because it's still a bit, you know, for the techies, but do you think it will become maybe easier to use and will be more widely adopted?
So the problem with more decentralized solutions is that there's basically a trade-off where I think that there's a trade-off in terms of the technology where the more peer-to-peer you are, the less liquidity you're going to have. And you know, the ultimate example of that is like BTC Pay Server, where that's really as peer-to-peer as it gets, where you're exchanging goods and services for Bitcoin. But that has terrible liquidity compared to the other extreme of whether it's the regulated US futures market or a top-tier exchange like Kraken. You're talking about orders of magnitude of difference. And I think that's why ultimately exchanges are going to continue to be like a major driver in this industry, is because the liquidity between the USD and Bitcoin and Euro and the Bitcoin is the most important you know, driver of success as a money. Because if it's not the most liquid with arguably, you know, what is the most liquid in our economies, US dollars or euros, then what is it competing for, right? At a merchant adoption level, you're talking about just a tiny percentage of the economy.
yeah, thank you for that. And so in a couple of seconds, we are going to move to the main part of the show, what we call the plat de résistance. And I'm going to let Fanis talk about different subjects with Pierre, such as Bitcoin as a savings technology and maybe the next world reserve currency. So Fanis, I'll leave you the mic.
Yeah, thank you, Guillaume. So yes, Pierre, you've been, I think, quite a promoter of the idea that Bitcoin is, so among a lot of other things, really a savings technology. And so it's a thing that you found wasn't emphasized enough. And so the idea is that it will allow people to have a cash balance and to hold it, to hold money in the long run without having to invest it. And that can be useful, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So can you tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way to think about cash from an economic perspective is that cash allows you to hedge away what's called uncertainty. And so uncertainty is distinct from risk in the sense that risk is something that's insurable, right? That you can pay to have someone take on that cash flow risk. Cash flow uncertainty, you're actually going to have to self-insure for, because there isn't an actuarial model for it, and it's and there's lots of different examples of this. For example, if your unexpected cash flow, or sorry, if your uncertain future cash flow is having an interesting investment opportunity appear, there's no way that any insurance company could insure you against that, right? So it's not a risk, it's an uncertainty, because it's uninsurable. And there's lots of examples of cash flows like that that are uninsurable. And so when you have an uninsurable cash flow uncertainty, then you're going to have to hold cash. Now, it used to be the case that you would hold some gold coins or some silver coins. Now, there's problems with gold. So the very high cost of transporting gold and also of its illiquidity and the illiquidity, we can talk about the issues of coinage and debasement by monetary authorities and all of this, but the root cause of this is how expensive it is to verify that the gold you have has the value that you're expecting. And that cost, it gets abused by governments with the coinage aspect of it, but then it also, it's not so much that there's not a cost to it, it's that it's also impossible to verify the global supply of gold and to limit it. And so historically, for example, it's been a problem when Spain discovered the New World, right? The supply of gold dramatically increased. And there's other examples of that throughout history of gold rush and all this. But also, what if in the future we bring in an asteroid that has a huge amount of gold in it, right? And so at that point, the supply is infinite, and you don't have any difficulty adjustment like you do with Bitcoin. So, yeah, in terms of savings, let's see, where was I with savings? Yeah, so eventually people had to start putting money in banks because they lived in a high trust environment, right, where they were able to trust the banker would take care of their gold. And that they would be able to issue letters of credit, and so they can go travel around Europe, whatever it is, without having to actually transport the physical gold. So at that point, that's when we started sliding into inflation, because then those deposits would get lent out because statistically not everyone was going to come in and claim their gold. So you had the development of fractional reserve banking. So that was an unstable system. Because ultimately you can only go so far in how much you leverage the financial system before you destabilize the monetary one. And so it consistently led to the creation of central banks around the world, because at that point people wanted, it's funny, we're just talking about uncertainty and risk. Fractional reserve banking has uncertainty. So fractional reserve banking is uninsurable. The reason that most countries and most jurisdictions around the world have government insurance for bank deposits is because bank deposits are uninsurable by the private sector. And so, because they are uncertainty, they are not risk. And so, ultimately, the taxpayers have to be forced into subsidizing this uninsurable uncertainty for the fractional reserve bankers. And, the fractional reserve bankers, they're essentially the original fiat, right? And so then we can get into government policy and governments borrowing from banks, and there's a huge amount of, in fact, the president of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, she was in legal troubles here in France because of the commingling between the banking system and the government. So it really shows how terrible the situation has gotten throughout the world, and France is no exception.
Yes, definitely. So there is this notion of risk and uncertainty, and the difference between those two notions. And from what I understood about your idea of Bitcoin as a world reserve currency and savings technology, is also that with the fiat systems that we know today, people are really incentivized to consume really quickly, or if they want to save, to put it in more and more risky investments, so riskier and riskier investment, which is partly solved with Bitcoin. So is that what you also mean with savings technology?
Yeah, so what Bitcoin allows is for people to really hold cash, because in the fractional reserve banking system, you're not holding cash, you're actually investing in the bank. And so, there's the negative externality that we talked about, the FDIC and all the bailouts, but The other issue with that is that, from an accounting perspective, when you look at your balance sheet and it says cash, and this is true for like a Fortune 500 company, it'll also be cash equivalents, right? So yield generating assets, whether it's money market funds or short-term government treasury bonds. In either case, these are listed as cash equivalents because they have the liquidity of cash while generating yield. And the reason they have liquidity of cash is because this is a system where you basically have to put your money inside of a bank account in order to be able to move it around at the speed of what people want to do. Otherwise, we'd have to be mailing gold nuggets to each other. And anyway, that's a whole different story. So yeah, the reason that Bitcoin is fantastic for savings is that now you don't have to own other assets and be chasing, trying to avoid inflation, right? Because the number one problem for holding fiat in a bank account at cash, in any case, in the best case, they'll pay you 2%, right, as a deposit return, and they'll match inflation. Now, they'll match what the government inflation says, but I don't think they're actually matching inflation. And so you have to minimize your cash holdings and maximize how much you buy in stocks and how much you buy in risky bonds, right? And that's how people have made money over the past 30, 40 years in this fiat system, is by taking on as much risk as possible and taking on as much uncertainty as possible. And then when it blows up, just having the government come in and clear it up. Now, they really benefited this time because there was a virus, and so they were able to get a bailout under the guise of like, oh, hospitals are overwhelmed. I guess we have to print trillions of dollars. Like, what are you talking about? You don't have to print trillions of dollars if hospitals are overwhelmed. You just need to, you don't need to buy U.S. treasuries. You need to go buy more PPE, right? And so governments, instead of buying more PPE, they said it's illegal to not sell PPE to us, and we set the price. And so guess what? They had a really tough time with PPE. But in any case, yeah, the banking system got bailed out this time on the best terms that they've ever had, probably. If you look at just the sum totality of all the benefits they've had from this coronavirus stuff. One of the most egregious ones was in the U.S., they had this paycheck protection program for small businesses. And they had the whole thing go through the banking system. And so the banking system made billions of dollars on the fees involved in originating all of these loans that were loans of your money back to you. So you paid in all these taxes, and then instead of refunding you the tax money, they had you borrow it from the banking system in the most bizarre scheme I've ever seen in the fiat system, all because they were panicking, I think, about the coronavirus stuff, which there's a lot of different ways of doing this, right? Like I like the Andrew Yang approach of we're just going to print money and give it to each individual person, and that's how we're going to do it, instead of we're going to print money and we're going to give it to hedge fund billionaires. Like, what kind of system is that? I'd rather have it just go to everyone equally, if we're going to be printing money. Or we switch to Bitcoin and we don't print money, right? I think that's the fairest.
Yeah, of course. But you're right, yes. If you have to choose between printing money and giving to billionaires, or printing money and giving it to everyone, the second proposition is maybe fairest. And so it was really interesting. So this short discussion about Bitcoin as savings technology. And now I'd like to move to Bitcoin technical improvements that have been made, especially during the bear markets. So in 2017 bull run, you know, there was some issues. So on the protocol level,
So many.
yeah, you know, you had to wait long and to pay extra fees to have your transactions being added to blocks. And there was also issues in the whole ecosystem, you know, with the problem with exchanges that couldn't do KYC quick enough to onboard everybody, stuff like this.
Yeah.
And the bear market was, I think, an opportunity for the Bitcoin protocol and the whole ecosystem to develop and become more resilient. And so on the protocol level first, so what improvement do you think were made during the bear market? Because so we had SegWit implemented before the bull market, but what really matters is SegWit usage, and it was very low at the beginning. Now it's almost 50%. And there are also, you know, Schnorr's signatures and taproots that are around the corner. How do you think this will benefit to the Bitcoin protocol when the next bull run begins?
Yeah, so I think that the number one issue the Bitcoin network had in December of 2017 was congestion. So there was just a lot of transactions competing to get into blocks in a very short amount of time. Basically, seeing it then die down, right, in the sense that transaction fees quickly came back down to 1 Satoshi per byte in the ensuing, you know, year, that this really was a timing issue, right? And the solution for this, again, I think this is where we learned that there is transaction fee risk, not just transaction fee uncertainty. And the reason that you can hedge against this risk and that it is an insurable risk is because you can buy a derivative called a lightning channel. And so with a lightning channel, what you're doing is you're buying a very specific kind of contract, which is saying that I have the right, but not the obligation, to transfer my Bitcoin across this channel at some point in the future. And then if everything goes okay, because the peers are online and the payment gets routed and all of this, that you know, you're going to be able to send Bitcoin with some degree of finality, with a trust minimized environment, and you're going to be able to do it even if on-chain fees are very high. And that, you know, I don't know what Lightning routing fees are going to end up looking like, but it's going to be a competitive market between the Lightning off-chain routing fees and the Bitcoin on-chain transaction fees. And at equilibrium, we would expect that, you know, everyone would understand kind of the daily and weekly and monthly rhythm of transaction usage, and that everyone would start timing their transactions so well that, you know, Bitcoin transaction fees go up very slowly, linearly, rather than being extremely volatile and, you know, bad for the user experience. Now, Lightning channels are going to be automated, and so when someone uses a Bitcoin wallet in the future, they won't really know that they are using this contract consciously. To them, it'll just be a Venmo of receive Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin, send Bitcoin. Like, there's nothing more complicated than that at the payments level, and they're not going to know that behind the scenes, what they have going on is a Lightning node that is automatically managing a set of channels to ensure liquidity for the user experience at the top level of the app. And so what you're going to have is, now we're talking about changes during this bear market, right? Like what has improved. On the Lightning side, what I think it has the most impact on this is the multipath payments, atomic payments. And so what that allows you to do is be able to send one payment through several channels. And so now you've got I think it's going to be a much more liquid network where you don't have to worry about channel management nearly as much as you did in the past. We'll see. That's still a very new innovation, but I think that with this, it's going to become very easy to have a payments experience with Bitcoin, and it's going to allow us to scale for a significant period of time. Eventually, I do think that on-chain fees are going to get too high, but there's so many headwinds against that. So let's put aside the Lightning stuff. Now you add on Taproot. If you add Taproot and Lightning, that will dramatically reduce the amount of block space usage by that class of transactions, basically. So I think that there's a huge runway for Bitcoin just on innovations that are on the horizon, where we don't really need to be worrying about scaling in the way that people were freaking out in 2016 and 2017. I think that in the next bull run, we're going to be able to avoid that $35 transaction fee month because we're going to have a much more advanced, approach to using the system.
Right. So cool. So we're talking a lot about Bitcoin. I'm just curious. People have talked a lot about problems with Bitcoin and other DLTs or distributed ledger technologies. Solving problems that Bitcoin hasn't, or blockchain in general hasn't. Do you have anything to say about alternative systems that might be on the rise that could give Bitcoin, run for its money, or something more stable, something that, an ideal system that you see emerging in other companies or systems?
Yeah, so I guess this is a question about like Bitcoin maximalism, right? Because the answer to your question is basically no, because I think that all of the alternatives I've seen have trade-offs that make it such that their system doesn't have more certainty than Bitcoin's. And to me, certainty is actually the only part of the system that I value, in the sense that that's what results in it being cash, right? If it had uncertainty in the system, then in the protocol rules, right, and in the functioning of that peer-to-peer network, then that fundamentally undermines its ability to be money, right? For me, at least, my understanding of the purpose of cash, right, essentially being a uncertainty minimized asset, and there's just no other systems that are even really trying to do that, right? And it seems like systems like Ethereum are trying to maximize uncertainty, and that's and they try to minimize risk, right? That's what Maker is about. And Bitcoin has the opposite approach of let's maximize certainty and let's let risk happen. Let's let the price go from $200 to $20,000 to $39,000 to $10,000. Like the exogenous risk surface for Bitcoin is like unbounded from historical financial perspective, but the internal certainty of the system is, to me, it's not absolute, right? In the sense that there are risks of like a bug, right, in this code that we wouldn't know about or whatever. So my argument isn't that Bitcoin is certain, my argument is that Bitcoin is the least uncertain. And so all other systems have strictly more uncertainty about them, even if they're, especially if they are trying to maximize they're trying to minimize risk as well in having their stable coin.
Yeah, I was saying, do you still have time for the rapid fire questions? It's 10 questions, really fast. You have to answer.
Okay, let's try it.
All right, so you have one joker for the 10 questions. So if you don't want to answer one, you can just say next. All right? And it's going to be on your left on the screen to see the questions, and I'm going to tell them. So first, Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV?
Oh, that's I'd have to say Bitcoin Cash.
All right.
They're more
Pierre
into the node governance,
Rochard?
whereas BSV is too much into the miner governance.
All right. All right. So Pierre Rochard or Pierre Roquefort?
Oh, I like the chief because everyone predicted the cheese would be short-lived as a meme, and that prediction came true. So to me, it was the perfect meme life cycle. Too many memes drag on for too long.
Okay. New York Agreement or Cartel de Medellin?
Oh, man, I really like that series on Netflix. So I have good memories of it. But ultimately, I've got to say that in terms of a really fun time in Bitcoin, fighting against the New York Agreement stands out, and I think it was entirely unnecessary. Like, we could have just we didn't need to troll these people on Twitter. Like, we really didn't need to. We could have just kept running our nodes and kept trading on exchanges and lived our lives. But yeah, so the New York Agreement, I think, just from the trolling on Twitter was a fascinating point in time.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe next time we can talk about the effects of maximalism. But next, priced in or not priced in?
Oh, not priced in. No, of course not.
All right. Kraken or Binance?
Kraken.
Halving or halvening?
It depends. It depends because happening is from Ron
You have to
Paul's
choose
meme.
one.
It's happening. Well, all right. All right, happening.
All right. Is everything really bigger in Texas?
Yes.
Bitcoin or Bitcoin? Capital B or not?
Oh, lowercase. It's a generic commodity.
Brr or brr? Which one is right?
I think the one on the right.
All right, and last question. Before last question, I would like to thank you, Pierre, for coming on the show, and I hope you'll come back. Thank you for your time, and thank you to everyone who followed the show. We'll be present next month with another speaker, and we'll let you know that on our Twitter account at TheBastionVR, and you can also follow Pierre on Twitter at Pierre_Rochard. And so, Pierre, for the last question, before we are set apart, 6 Bitcoin on a coin-based wallet forever, or 2 in a cold wallet of your choice?
2.
All right, so
No, brilliant.
thank you for coming on. I don't know if you want to say something before you go.
No, thank you for having me on. This was a really strange experience, but a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.
You can stay with us in the room if you want to ask us questions about what we discussed today. And we are going to go drink some virtual beers right beyond us. So you will see we have a lot of fun images, and also please stay in if you want to talk more. Thank you, Pierre. Bye-bye.